Welcome to A Better Divorce podcast, where we have conversations about the emotional, financial, and legal issues that are on your mind or should be on your radar if your goal is to keep your divorce out of court. I'm collaborative divorce attorney and mediator Andrea Vacca, and I know that how you divorce matters to your long-term well-being. That's why it's my mission to help you have a better divorce with as little acrimony as possible, so that you can create the best life possible on the other side of your marriage. I am so happy to welcome Debra Hamilton to the podcast today so that we can have a conversation about family pets and what people should be doing and thinking about when they're ending their marriage and they have some, pets that they love in their family. So I couldn't think of a better person to talk about this topic than Debra. She's an author, a conflict coach, pet care planner, a mediator, and all of everything she does is around for people who love their animals and are either in conflict right now over their beloved pet or want to avoid a disagreement in the future. So, Debra, welcome to A Better Divorce podcast.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm so glad to be here with you. It's definitely becoming more aware. We're all more aware of pets and divorce becoming something that's an issue. There are now like 7 states that have legislation dealing just with this in divorce. So I'm so glad you're having me on.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted you here because we know pets are so much more than property. And previously, New York being one of those 7 states you mentioned, pets were always just looked at as chattel, like any other piece of property that you might have. But now it's viewed differently. So they're members of our families, and it brings up so many emotional issues around pets, but also physical, logistical issues, and financial issues. So, um, how did you become specialized in mediating animal disputes? Let's start there. How did you do that? How did you get into this?
It's a very interesting question because I have always had animals. I show Irish setters, so I'm always in that world, the Westminster groups and things. And I was litigating independently in my own practice. And the last case I litigated was a case that didn't have to deal with divorce, but dealt with a conflict over animals. And I said, there has to be a better way. So I shut down my litigation practice and started Hamilton Law Mediation, where I simply help people in conflict over animals. My husband said, very narrow niche. And I said, I'm not thinking so. Maybe not in 2010 were people as aware as they are in 2023. But I knew that it was coming down the pike, that people were really going to become attached to their pets and they were going to become um, more a source of agitation. So I started my practice. I only mediate conflicts between people over animals. I conflict coach one side if the other side won't come to mediation. So, as you know, Andrea, taking a little of that reactive defensive language out of responses, which then can get people to have a better divorce because we are all triggered and we all are triggered by the same things. And I know your triggers if I'm married to you and you know mine. So we work to help people recognize them and not rise to the bait, so to speak. So that's what I do, but only with animals.
Only an animal. So if somebody is in conflict with um, a soon to be ex around the spouse, around an animal, and they can't get them to come to mediation to talk about this, you'll help coach them on how to advocate for themselves, what to say, how to make their point, how to listen better. So that's how you can work with people as well, right?
Absolutely, because it's the active listening, and I help their attorneys as well. If they don't come to mediation, I help their attorneys as well to understand and appreciate and acknowledge everyone's feelings, as we know, and then hope to move forward in a way that's less adversarial.
Right. We're talking about this before the podcast a few days ago, I guess it was now, you mentioned something about how pets are usually the last best thing you did in your relationship, right? Adopting that pet, bringing them in, choosing the pet, bringing it into your family. It was a hopeful, event in your life. And so does that ever come up that you try to get people to focus on on those feelings again, or the why they brought that pet in, or the strengths they saw in each other that allowed them to think they could have a pet together? How does that come in?
It's perfect that you brought that up first because when I meet with couples who are arguing over the pet, I often have them write down how important the pet is to them. And then how important do they think the pet is to the other party with as much um, positivity as they can muster. Because if you really are neutral, you can say, well, yes, the dog does like my husband when I'm not home. And yes, he does feed it, or my ex, and he does feed it. Uh, so, what I try to do is make sure I bring them back to where they were when they purchased this dog, how those wonderful feelings, what they've done since then. Maybe one is taking more care of the animal than the other. However, unfortunately, your pet doesn't hate your ex. If these people live in the house together with this pet, they pretty much love them all. And I have Irish setters, as I said at the beginning, and believe me, my dogs don't even know my husband exists when I'm home. However, when I'm not home, they treat him with such love and affection that if we ever got divorced, I would really be hard pressed not to share the dogs with him because they're a big part of his life too.
So helping them both, see what's in it, why what's important to them, and to see and to empathize and understand the other person too, and acknowledge that,
And recognize the pet doesn't hate your ex. So, when that person leaves, there's a mourning, even if they're not the, primary caregiver. There's a mourning for the dog because they're like, what? I had a relationship breakup with a Rhodesian Ridgeback where the woman did triathlons and the Rhodesian Ridgeback did all the training with her. And the Rhodesian Ridgeback sat on the couch with a football jersey on, eating Cheetos on the weekends with her ex. The dog liked both. It wasn't like, oh, yeah, I just want the person with the triathlon. He likes sitting there. So recognizing what's in the best interests of your pet and not necessarily thinking a judge is going to see it in the way that you would like them to see it. They see this information, and if you can do this on your own in mediation or with your attorneys in negotiation, far better than letting a judge decide, which now 7 states are requiring judges to do.
So briefly, what is New York saying about? Oh no, I'm not going to ask you to talk about all 7 states laws, but in New York, 'cause I'm in New York, and I'm interested. So what exactly, is New York law? I know it was changed recently to talk about how pets, are part of under the equitable distribution statute. But can you briefly explain like what happens in New York now if you can't agree on what to do with your pet?
So, under the domestic relation law, they have added a clause to Section 5, which reads the judges will decide what is in the best interest of the pet. And best interest is defined by what we call the Raymond standard, which is where they feel love, where they are loved, where they have security. So, the judge is going to look at all the information you provide for why you should have the pet. And if it meets that, in my opinion, amorphous standard of what's, loved and be loved and would love, then they're going to keep the pet or send the pet where they feel that pet will be well taken care of in its best interests. Some of the clauses, like in Illinois and in Alaska, they have well being of the pet. So, what's in the well being? I know that Judge Cooper, who started this whole thing off in New York with Travis v. Murray, wanted to use a best for all concern standard, which I think would have been a little better because even as you would probably agree with me, Andrea, the best interest of the children is an amorphous, idyllic, trying to reach it standard. Where it comes to pets, you really need to understand where the judge is coming from. Judge Cooper, was a huge pet lover, so he really wanted to dig into this. If you have a judge who isn't a pet lover, who thinks this is a waste of time or loves cats and not dogs, it may color the way they address the best interest.
Right, right. Okay, well, So let's see if somebody's thinking, we're our marriage is about to end. We love our animals. Our children love our animals. So there are so many things that can come up. What are some of the issues that you want to make sure a couple is contemplating to make sure they address all the issues that they might need to address around a pet?
Well, what you want to start with is try to agree among yourselves that there will be a way where you can share this pet. How can you share this pet? If you can't do that because the anger, animosity, and bad feelings are so deep, I couldn't possibly ever see you again, recognize you may need somebody to come in and help. Your attorney may or may not be that best person if they can remain neutral to a point where they can help you go forward. I would suggest that they use a collaborative attorney if they'd like to, because those attorneys, I'm one as well, really work to find the best next step. It's not simply, what do you want? And I'm going to get it for you. Rather, what do you want? Let's see how we can get there. And is there a third way we can do it that'll be, you didn't even think of, that'll work for you and your ex? Or you can go to mediation and have a mediator do that to enable you to build what's right for you. If you have children, maybe the pet's staying with the children. However, I've had divorces where the pet stayed with the ex that didn't have the kids because they were lonely, or it traded off. It was a fluid thing. What you want to seek, which I know you do, Andrea, in your practice, is you want to seek the best ability to move forward after divorce without animosity and anger. Let me tell you, if there are no children in the relationship, if maybe it's a same sex relationship, moving forward without the pet in your life is almost um, soul crushing. So, recognizing that as attorneys and mediators and judges, and making sure you understand and respect that can help the parties get to a place where they can respect it for their ex as well.
So really, I do see in child-free couples where their pets, have become so much more of their children. They're their babies. They talk about them that way. Our kids, I've had people refer to the dogs as the girls.
Like
Um,
babies.
your fur babies, yeah. So it very it's so there's so much emotion there. And then logistically, how will you each spend time with this pet? Maybe you're not living that close to each other, but I've seen couples really jump through hoops with living in one, maybe half hour by um mass transit away from each other, and you can't bring certain size dogs on the subway. And so how are you going to get the pet, and how will they get it back to your apartment? And I mean, there's so some of the logistical issues of sharing pets. I've also seen some conflicts where I had a a a couple where the husband, and it was a father of there were 2 children, he really wanted this pet because he was lonely. He it was his buddy, and he wanted the pet when he didn't have the kids, and the mom didn't f but wanted the pet to be with the kids. I don't know if they asked the kids what they I don't know what's about that, but it ended up that the pet was moving with the kids, and I always felt like, the husband in this case, really didn't get his needs met. Like, he never had time alone with the dog. He didn't get his his that loneliness feeling wasn't going to be addressed. But you mentioned, like, maybe trying something out and then seeing how it works, right? So, you know, uh, like, as part of it, when you're thinking about divorcing with your pet, like, maybe trying out an agreement for 6 months or see how it's going and agree to check in with each other. I think that could be something that works, right?
When I work with people, either the attorneys and their clients or the clients, I always want to check in because we always have to check in with the pet. Because moving with the kids might be really stressful for the dog. The dog might have appreciated, say, being left alone with the dad for long walks and the kids going away. We project what we want the dog to want, and we decide that way. And then we use a 3 month, 6 month, 9 month check in to see if A, it's working for the people, B, it's working for the pet. And C, is the transfer creating a lot of emotional stress? I know that I've had shares that were international. One person lived in Canada, the other lived in Virginia. It worked great for them. They flew in, they got the dog, they flew out, or they drove in, they got the dog, they drove out. It w- it was it was amazing to me, I can tell you. But it to this day, it's still working, and they call me and tell me how wonderful it was. And a lot of the animosity was due to the terrible emotional feelings of the breakup, having nothing to do with the dog. The dog was how they were both venting with each other, because I'm not going to let you have the dog because you're the meanest person in the world. And I'm not going to let you have the dog because you're the meanest person in the world. And you have a new girlfriend, or you have a new boyfriend. And that's what occurs. It's interesting that if you can, which is very hard, before you divorce, when you get the pet, maybe a year down the pike, try to check in with each other to see what would really be in the best interest of that pet if something were to happen. And nobody ever does that. You know that, Andrea. Nobody ever considers they're ever going to get divorced until they're getting divorced. However, if you have a pet, maybe checking in and saying, I'd real like I just did with my husband. I would really want to make sure he saw the dogs, even though I might be very angry with him. I know my dogs would suffer if they didn't see him because they love him. And I would do it. You just have to rise above and be the best person you can be. But then in your better divorce, that's what you help people do.
That's right. It sounds like the Canadian Virginia couple that probably improved their relationship because it was all about the dog now. It sounds like they got on the same page. They could be more respectful of each other. They worked together and probably healed their relationship in some way by having
Absolutely, absolutely did. And in fact, she had to be hospitalized. So the first time out, they had 6 months on, 6 months off. She had to keep the dog for 9 months because she was going to be in the hospital after surgery for about 9 months. So she said, "Would you mind? I'll keep him for 9 months this time." And at first, the initial trigger, right? Of course, she's breaking the agreement first thing out of the box. And we regrouped, we talked, and he said, "Oh, okay, then I'll keep the dog for 9 months. And then when you're better, we'll go into the 6 month, 6 month." It worked great. But had they been left alone to their own devices, they would have gone back to that triggering and response discussion, which would not have been helpful to them. And yes, their relationship is so great now. She feels much better about herself. He feels great about, the fact that he can talk to her and that the dog's with him. So it was probably the best divorce scenario because it was the worst divorce scenario. And it wasn't a divorce, it was a relationship. And you know that courts don't even want to see those. It was a relationship breakup. So they actually were really smart to go to mediation, work through it, be tough, um, but yet be active listeners, which is what's so important in what you and I do.
it is. What are some financial issues that people should be thinking about?
Well, it's funny you should mention that because when I was reviewing all the cases that have come down, it says that judges can award, joint custody and financial coverage. However, none of the decisions that I've read that have come down in New York or anywhere else have set forth a joint custody relationship because they don't want to enforce it. Judges would rather, and I say this with all love and affection, drink castor oil than have to deal with a pet issue in their court. And so they're going to decide who's going to get the pet, and then that's it, which means that if something happens to that possessory owner, there is no connectivity between the person who wanted the dog just as much. So I don't have to call you, Andrea, if something happens to me and I can't care for the dog, which I think really doesn't take the dog's best or cat's best interest into um, uh, consideration. Also, there's very little set forth that I've read, and I'm still learning, where financial um, commitments are made. If you're not going to let me see the dog, why am I paying the vet bill and the pet insurance bill? Tell me about that. Why would I do that? Right? I mean, hello.
Sometimes we'll work it into, the child support, um, sharing of arrangement, the pet expenses, well,
Right.
like a child support, a child related expense, but the insurance, the food.
not getting to see the dog, so why should I have to pay for it? If you went to court and got full award of the dog or the cat or the bird or the horse, go with God.
You're on your own, right? So
Go with God. Don't try to sneak it in the back door as a child expense. And so for me, when I do the agreements, we do talk about shared expenses because we're sharing it. And sometimes after 3 months or 6 months, somebody realizes it's too much for me. The dog isn't doing well, and then you can make a fully informed decision to give the dog to Andrea, and then the other party will help pay. It's not, I'm being told by a judge that you get the dog, so I'm not paying. Rather, we tried it. It really was stressful for me or for the dog. And so we're going to revisit it. We're going to decide that it would be better for you to have the dog. And yeah, I'd like to help pay. I'd like to be able to be there if you have to put the dog to sleep in very many years. Whatever it is, or if something comes up, I will take the dog.
so mediation is such is a better approach. If everyone listening to this, you don't want a judge making these decisions for you, just like you don't want them making decisions for your children, for your money, for your homes, or anything else. So, um, so mediation
And we
conflict.
say that, Andrew, with all love and respect for judges. We know that it's so hard for them to do this.
They don't want to do it either. That's their job. They'll do it if they have to. I say court should be the last resort for your divorce,
Right.
no matter what the issue is. So if you've settled everything else except the pets, like try mediation. If you can't, if your attorneys haven't been able to help you, or if you know off the bat this is going to be a real trigger, start with mediation on that issue. And because perhaps if you can resolve this, it will help you
Resolve.
resolve other issues. You can get us a win there, right? You can a win seeing that you can work together and you can negotiate and you can hear each other. And then you can bring that to other parts of your relationship or other parts of the discussion that you need to have. So so let's talk about mediation. So they would come in and sit down with you. I'm a mediator too. I don't just do pet disputes though, but
No.
so you would someone would call you and you usually reach by two people or one person. How do people
Well, that's always tricky because, of course, one person's going to call me and say, listen, I'm having a disagreement with someone over an animal, be it a breeder with an owner with a breeder, a owner with a veterinarian, divorce, wherever it is. And when you reach out, I usually say, okay, don't tell me very much about this because I really would like to help you and I want to remain neutral. And your best bet is to say, Andrea, I reached out to Debra Hamilton. She's a mediator of conflicts between people over animals. I'd like to have her help us resolve this to retain whatever relationship we can, find out how to do what's best for the pet in divorce or whatever, and move forward in a positive way, less expensive way, and really be in control of what that next step is going to be. Because if you go to court, your attorney is going to say or do whatever he thinks or she thinks they need to do to get what you want. And it may backfire, it may work. It's always a 50-50 gamble. Or in mediation, you really have 100 gamble because we could, find that one side after I listen to what Andrea says, go, that makes a lot of sense. I guess I am being a little selfish. That has happened. So I'm not being, overly simplistic. But that has happened when I stop telling myself the story of why Andrea wants the dog. And she tells me, and I go, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, you've had that, right? I didn't know that. And then all of that animosity starts to drain out of someone. So really mediation is the best. And if in fact the other party will not go to mediation, or if you're in a collaborative practice, um, there are financial neutrals, there are child neutrals, have a pet neutral come in to help you discuss this one piece. Because it isn't as easy as it seems. It really does make a difference if there's someone there who this is all they do. They help you discuss your pet in a way that is going to allow you to move forward in a peaceful manner.
you've seen it all. You've seen you can and you really can help people understand what's most important to them and get them off of their positions and really talk about the pets, as a, in addition to what the parties need. What are some common arrangements that you've seen for how people end up resolving time sharing with cats or dogs? I mean, is it different or what are some common, like we have some common custody parenting schedules that we see. What do you see works and doesn't work with cats and dogs if they're different?
Well, it depends on the ability of the parties to, um, choose what's best for them and the pet. So, if it's a pet who should not go back and forth every week, I'll own up that my neutrality, is tested when somebody wants a dog to, go back and forth every week for a few days. One of the cases that I read, the husband and wife shared the pet, and then the pet was locked in the closet, and she thought that he had, lost the pet, so she took the dogs away, and he's like, "But wait a minute, the dog was in the house." And it went to court, $38,000, all of her savings later. She then had to share the dog, with her husband on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, her ex-husband, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And whether or not the dogs have a good reaction, there's no check-in, there's no nothing. It's a court order. Where when you do it in mediation, as I said, you check in 3, 6, 9, see if it's working. I've had 6 months on, 6 months off. I've had 3 months on, 3 months off. I've had only when I go on business trips. I've had only when I'm on vacation, because some people can't really commit to 6 months with a dog. But if you travel for work, please call me first, and I'll be happy to take the dog for the 3 or 4 days you're traveling and then return it to you.
That's a huge benefit, right? If you can have the dog all the time and then your ex-partner says, "I'll be there as your first caretaker for the dog." Wow. I mean, that
That always works out the best. I have to say that of most of them, when they realize that they may or may not be in the best interest of the pet, having it a week on, a week off, a month on, a month off, whatever, that if they can fit them in, then they don't really have to see their ex that often, which is, you know, music to some ears.
Mhm.
They get to see the pet. I'll never forget that I was on a podcast with Catherine Miller, who we both know, and after the podcast was over, she said that her ex-husband said to her, about 10 years after they were divorced, "I wish I had saved some time to spend with our dog." And they never even addressed it. It just automatically went with the kids, so it stayed with her, it went with the kids. And it's that you just need to speak up, but speak up in a way, as you and I both profess, a curious way, a way that really respects that we're going to do what's best for this pet because we love this pet like we love our kids. And let's make sure, or maybe we don't have kids and then we love them like kids, that we do what's best for this pet going forward. There are different breeds that don't do well. Cats never like to change places. However, my son has a cat and he has moved 7 times and the cat has not skipped a beat. So every cat is different. That's why we check in, to see if the cats are doing well. And then you really have to be honest and above board. And I will say that there are so many cottage industries that will enable you to get your animal from point A to point B without ever having to see your ex again. So you can leave it at the vet, they'll pick it up. You can leave it at doggy daycare, they'll pick it up. If you live near each other, there's taxis that'll take them. There are dog walkers that will take them. If like my friend in Virginia, they fly, JetBlue Mint and take the dog with them. So whatever floats your boat.
Oh, well, I think what we're hearing is that there are just, it's not as simple as, you know, I walked the dog and I fed the dog every day, so I get to keep the dog, right? So we need to encourage, our clients and people who are considering ending their marriages, just think about this and really think about it from a 365 view, from your own perspective, the dog or cat or the animal's perspective, the children's perspective. Long term, short term, past is important, but the future is really what you need to look at too. So, Deb, that's a
Really
helpful.
glad you said that. I hate to interrupt you, but I'm really glad you said that because the judges do take into account who walked it and who fed it, and that's not dispositive. In my opinion, having sat through so many mediations with people over pets, that's just a tip of the iceberg, but what else are they gonna do? It's the only thing they can measure.
I always tell clients, if you litigate any issue in your divorce, it's about the past. right? The judge can only look to what happened in the past. How did you raise the kids? What did you do with money? What was the lifestyle? These are important factors, but you get to create an agreement for your present and your future. Let's look forward. Where do you want to be? How are you going to transform this family now that you're not living together, now that you're not married? So you can be so much more creative than what you did in the past.
And
So
so much more creative than the judges who are coming and looking for one day.
or many, many days, half days, few hours
Usually,
each
I
day.
can tell you that they give them a day. They don't give them many days. It may be days pulling together all the information for the attorneys or for the collaborative attorneys, uh, but trust me, the judges give you a day. That's what, Judge Cooper said, "I'll give you a day.
On
You
this
just
issue.
give me a day, and I will then make a decision."
All right. Well, thank you, Deb. This is so helpful. I am really glad we got to talk about this. It's so common, and I hope I don't know. Next time I have a conflict I can't resolve around pets, I will be calling you. But let's talk. I ask all my guests at the end of every podcast, what's a better divorce tip that you can offer? What's yours?
So, a better divorce with pets tip is think about what's in the best interest of the pet before you give that decision over to somebody because he's wearing or she's wearing black robes. You know what's in the best interest. So the better divorce tip is sit down, think about how much the pet means to you, and then neutrally think how much the pet means to your ex, and really be clear about what would be in the best interest of the pet because you have the ability to do what's right for the pet.
Thank you. Perfect way to sum it up with a tip like that. Thank you for joining me today. And so what's the best way for people to find you?
So they can go to hamiltonlawandmediation.com. They can listen to my podcast, Why Do Pets Matter? We have great information there about having relationships with people that may spiral into conflict and how to spiral it out of conflict. Or they can call me. If you go to hamiltonlawandmediation.com, I know that's a mouthful and you can't spell it, and many people spell it meditation. And I go, yeah, you meditate too.
Well,
Uh, it would be fine. Just do Debra Hamilton. It's simple and easy. Thank you so much, Andrea. I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to help all your listeners to know how to have a better divorce with pets.
thanks, Deborah. Well, this has been another episode of A Better Divorce Podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode. You've been tuning in to another episode of A Better Divorce Podcast with Andrea Vacca. Thank you for subscribing, leaving your positive comments and reviews, and sharing the show with others. You can watch episodes at vaccalaw.com, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can listen through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Bye for now, and remember, you can have a better divorce.